I remember being a kid in the summer of 2014 when I was turning about 8 or 9 years old and just seeing the World Cup for the first time being held in Brazil. It was so magical. Just the intro alone. Still oozes with nostalgia to this day for me. And I feel like every time we see a country that we've never been to or we don't normally visit host the World Cup, you got Brazil in 2014, Russia in 2018. Actually, go back to 2010, the first time it was in Africa, in South Africa, and how much of a spectacle that was. And then in 2022, you have Qatar, countries that, the average person, certainly the average American, no offense, probably doesn't know the most about because these countries are so far away. We learn a lot about not just the history and the culture, but also the current international relations, how other countries perceive this country and the culture surrounding it. It's very fascinating and interesting. And today I want to look at Qatar specifically and look ahead to neighboring Saudi Arabia, which is hosting the 2034 World Cup, and to see how these countries have used what's called sports washing in the past, maybe how they're using it now, and how we can stop it from affecting the Middle East becoming properly relevant in our societies today, right now. But first, I want to take a moment and define what sports washing actually is. Sports washing is a term to describe either a governing organization or government of a nation using sports as sort of like a PR tactic, if you will, to improve their reputation, especially when they have scandals or, in this case, especially human rights. These are things that Qatar and Saudi Arabia have definitely struggled with, especially because their economies have become very wealthy due to oil reserves and natural gas in the past couple of decades. So is that the reason Qatar hosted the tournament? Is that why FIFA chose them? It turns out the answer is actually no. It was actually a corrupt bid as proved by what's called the Garcia report. It's a report that is hundreds of pages long that describes how Qatar basically got this bid over Australia, over Japan, South Korea, and especially the heavily favored United States bid. So if you didn't know, basically all these countries bid every time they're selecting a host for the World Cup. Delegates and executives will choose the host nation. So it's a long process, but that's how the process is done. And Qatar somehow won it in 2022, which shocked everyone. And they did prove it was corrupt. It's not just a conspiracy. There is mounting evidence behind it. But this did benefit Qatar because they wanted to diversify their economy. Now you see Saudi Arabia, they've got their Vision 2030 project, which you may or may not have heard about, which basically has the same objective to diversify the economy, to get other means of creating wealth for the country and for its people. This is especially important for Qatar because they are by far the world's leader in carbon emission per capita. To host a World Cup, you need stadiums. You need a bunch of different stadiums all over your country where all these different teams can play. Especially now, it's 48 teams in a World Cup, but even 4 years ago, the format was 32 teams, and you had round-robin matches happening every single day pretty much for a month. So you need stadiums, and Qatar really didn't have any because they had never hosted a tournament of this scale. This is the largest tournament in the world we're talking about. So they needed a massive amount of infrastructure, and they had basically a decade to complete it. So how exactly did they achieve this, and what did it take? The answer, my friends, is the Kafala System. Let's define what that actually is. So the Kafala System is where basically you have recruiters going to different countries. In Qatar's case, they were going to India, they were going to Bangladesh, Nepal, Egypt, Sudan, and they were going out to try to get foreign workers to come into Qatar to keep the economy growing.
They do this by paying a bunch of people to go to these countries, to small villages in places like Bangladesh and Nepal, to recruit a bunch of workers to come to Qatar to build. It is here where these workers were told they had to pay a recruitment fee, usually like $1,000 to $4,000, just to like get recruited to go to Qatar and work. These people don't have $1,000 to $4,000 lying around, so they often would borrow money from family or take out a loan with really high interest rates.
Because when countries get rich, as we've seen in history, immigrants typically will flock to the country faster and take lower paying jobs to actually keep the economy growing. While this seems like a acceptable form of getting workers to come in, the real secrets and misdeeds were when they actually got there. You see, under the Kafala system, foreign workers that come into a country like Qatar are given what's called a sponsor. Basically, this is a person that's in charge of the worker's contract and their status in the country as a documented worker. Now, this system is notorious for being extremely corrupt. And Qatar, mind you, used this to basically build all of their stadiums and a lot of the infrastructure elsewhere needed to host this tournament. Basically, there were workers that were promised one contract and then given another when they went to actually go in and sign the contract.
This one, the first contract, is sending to the agent in Kenya.
Yeah.
So we know he came in here because of this salary.
So they show you this contract.
Yeah.
And this is the contract that you assign initially.
Yeah.
Basic salary.
His basic salary is stated to be 1,100 rials, about $300 a month. It says he will be provided with decent accommodation, food money, and a ticket home after the 2-year period.
Then when we land here the first day, they are in airport. He check all the passport.
Yeah.
And he said tomorrow morning you have to arrive in office to signing.
Yeah.
When we go to the office, he changed another contract, and it's this one. The basic salary here is 500.
But this is
You see, leave salary that rate is 100, and this one food allowance is 100. So total salary here is 700.
They weren't paid on time, if at all. They would sometimes go months without paying, according to several testimonies. And they were forced, in Qatar it gets so hot, so much so that this tournament that's usually held in the summer was held in November and December to avoid the sweltering conditions. For these workers that were building the stadium, they had to work in these sweltering conditions, and they often died to heat stroke and, just causes of abuse. They worked long hours in the heat, and it was dangerous, and many thousands of workers died because of this. And what's brutal is that when they were the families back home in these countries were wondering what happened, and they would say something like a heart attack or maybe even pneumonia or something like that. They were often left uninformed of what actually happened to their own family members. By the way, the Kafala system was used by almost all of the Gulf countries and some others outside of that as well. Saudi Arabia recently abolished it in June of this year. I will talk about that in a bit though. So applying this to class principles, this demonstrates two things. Number one, the countries that are doing this in the Middle East, it's a big reason why the West considers them to be large power distance societies where, because if you look at like global rankings and everything, in terms of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, workers' rights, migrant rights as it comes to the Kafala system, these are countries that rank extremely low among their peers. And secondly, it shows just the lack of upward mobility. When you have a society where you can basically hold these people captive, when they go in to sign their contracts, their passports are confiscated. They can't leave the country without it. And what's crazy is that, these are families that are trying to make a living for their families back home. So they're basically forced mentally into providing for their families. That's what creates, we talk about more masculine countries where the questions you have to ask is, do they prioritize work over the family? It's easy to maybe criticize that for them when you have a wealthier country like the United States albeit with a lot of income inequality here, but that's a discussion that we've gone over. But when you have countries where there is a lot of poverty and a lot of need for systems that they're participating in, like the Kafala system, it is very hard to say no to that, which is why they allow themselves to be in this position in the first place, if that makes sense. Even in the States here, though, we can sort of apply this to the prison industrial complex. It is, in a way, these people are imprisoned. They are stuck in Qatar. Also, there was this journalist, Johnny Harris, extremely well-known YouTuber. He's an independent journalist. He believes that's the future of journalism. He was looking at this zoning map. He noticed this small blue area on this map of Doha where they had this zoning map, and he just knew something was up. He sent his own correspondent in there to get footage, and what he discovered was shocking.
Everything in yellow is a family zone, a place where bachelor workers are not allowed to live. If you project it onto like a real map, you will see that this is the entire city, basically. And then they reserved one little plot of land, a city away, still zoned for Doha, this little blue shape where these bachelor workers can live. Oh, but they made a few exceptions. Anyone who works at like markets and barber shops, restaurants, and white-collar professionals who are bachelors can also stay in the family zones. So really, these working bachelors is just a euphemism for guys who look like this. Guys who are there doing construction, who Qatar does not want to see in their shiny downtown area, so they reserved them a spot out here in the desert next to the sewage pond.
That this is where the workers were stuck, and they were not, I kid you not, allowed to leave this zone when the actual World Cup was going on, when the games were being played. So these stadiums that they built, couldn't use them, but they could build them all right. And you know what this strikingly resembles? The 1927 film Metropolis, which is a very famous film by Fritz Lang that I literally had to watch it and discuss it for a class, where the whole premise, it's supposed to be an exaggerated dystopian example, but you literally have the society that is prospering above in the light, and then you have workers down in the dark. It's supposed to be, and I won't go too in depth of it because this is a little off topic, but this definitely relates. The main point is it goes really far into showing how dystopian the Kafala system actually is. Now, I'm just gonna give Johnny Harris and soccer YouTubers like McQuell, people who are very well known in this space, and the FIFA president himself has acknowledged this before, albeit not really enough. Gianni Infantino. These people know what's going on and have addressed it. And then meanwhile, you got like Dude Perfect, and I love Dude Perfect. I watched them all the time as a kid. But they made a video about going around in Qatar, and it was like nothing was wrong.
We just went to Qatar. We raced camels, F1 cars, went dune bashing, rode the world's tallest indoor roller coaster, and for the first time ever, visited all 8 World Cup stadiums in one day. This is bucket list.
I know it's not their job to investigate this stuff. I would not expect Dude Perfect to do a deep dive into the horrors of Qatar because, to be fair, they're family friendly. They're entertainers. That's what they are, and very good at it. But the problem is when you have a base like Dude Perfect where millions of people are watching your videos every time one comes out, it creates this false narrative that Qatar is this like desert paradise where everything is great, and a lot of things they have done are great, but there's untold amounts of injustice, literally untold. So why am I talking about Qatar? Because it's 2025, the World Cup in Qatar was in 2022, so we're now 3 years removed from this tournament. So why would I bring it up? I bring it up because the World Cup host for 2034 is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is also a country that, albeit used to, until very recently, the Kafala System. They are trying to also diversify their oil-dependent economy. And they have engaged in what sports washing as well, trying to use sports as a way to get people to think highly of the country, which the people, amazing, but the government, not so much. And that's what we need to be paying attention to, is what are these governments doing? Saudi Arabia is also planning to build 11 new stadiums and also renovate 4 already existing stadiums. So, we have to ask the question, how are they going to achieve this? Do they have enough workers for this? I know Qatar has a smaller population and less cities outside of Doha. So, it doesn't at all excuse what they did, but you can see how, concerns would be there for would they have enough people to actually get this done for a tournament this large every single time. But look at like Newcastle United, the Premier League club in England, who was facing relegation to the second division, the EFL Championship. Basically, like it seemed like every other year when I was first getting into soccer, and now they have stars. They have made the UEFA Champions League. They have they've really turned it around, and that's because what the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund owns the team. So literally overnight, they became the richest team in the English Premier League. Now, the Public Investment Fund is definitely trying to cut ties with like the Crown Prince to make it seem like, oh no, the Saudi Arabian government is not involved with this. It's the public. That's another discussion, but these are things we need to keep an eye on with Saudi Arabia so that they don't use sports washing in the way that Qatar did. And so that, human rights, women's rights, all the progress that Saudi Arabia has recently made, it's almost scary that it's been so recent with like women being allowed to drive and all of that, voting rights and all of that. But we need to keep an eye on what they are doing to build these stadiums and to host, because ideally the host of a World Cup, especially a country that's never done it before like Saudi Arabia, and until very recently just the entire Middle Eastern region at large, we want this to be something, they want this to be that something that we can universally be proud of and say, this is awesome, the Middle East should keep doing this, this is how they will, because for so long there's this narrative that they've been, it's been a bad place because of wars, because of regimes and conflicts and regime change. To finally see them overcome that, that's part of the magic of sports. You look at a team like Haiti, who qualified for this World Cup in 2026, they had to play all of their games, all of their qualifying games elsewhere, outside of the country, because there was so much political unrest. Like, that's a great story in a country like Haiti that has been stricken with this narrative, even by the president right now, of the people there. To be able to see them overcome that is wonderful, and the Middle East should be able to do the same. So let me read you a passage from the executive summary by Amnesty International this year of Saudi workers. This is the Saudi workers report. It begins like this. For more than a decade, tens of thousands of migrant workers, many in low-wage jobs, have labored in Riyadh's searing heat and dust, carving tunnels, laying tracks, and providing administrative and other support to consortiums of Saudi and international companies. Their labor, often unseen but indispensable, culminated in the opening of the Riyadh Metro in January 2025. 176 kilometers of track, 85 stations, and billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. So when these countries build this infrastructure as they become wealthier and more globally prevalent to tourism, among other things, it's very important that we look at the actual means of what they're doing this. Because these have historically been large power distance societies where people don't have a lot of social mobility, we need to go in depth with that. We need to use, intercultural communications to go into that, to actually look at the means like the Kafala System of how they're actually building these stadiums, building these tunnels and bridges and highways and all these things and the like. We need to, you know, make sure that this is being done ethically and that there is reporting about this, because journalists were definitely not allowed in Qatar. We need to make sure that they are allowed in Saudi Arabia. Well, we can't change the law there. Like, let's be real. We're not going to change the laws for them, but we're going to cover it here. We're going to find out using zoning data, you know, using what other people like Johnny Harris have done in the past. How are we going to use that just to even get an idea of what's going to go on for the 2034 World Cup? I know it's only 9 years away, but this is, you know, the planning has already started. So the, you know, the conception, the city of Neom, which is super futuristic, all of that has started. So this is something that we need to put journalists on notice for. We need all hands on deck for this. So that's all I got to say. Hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.